The Carpathian Mountains stretch across the horizon like an ancient scar. Layer after layer of dark ridges sink into the fog, as if the land itself is trying to hide something. Locals say the mountains are alive, not alive in the way people are, but in a slower, older sense. Here, time does not move forward, it circles. Every path remembers footsteps. Every forest remembers voices. And some places remember people so well that they refuse to let them go. Far from marked hiking trails and tourist routes, there is a village most travelers never notice. No landmarks, no souvenir shops, just a few wooden houses scattered along a narrow road, surrounded by forests on all sides. The silence here feels different, heavy, intentional. People who live in the village rarely talk to strangers. When they do, their words are short, and their eyes often drift toward the forested hills above the houses. At the edge of the village, a single road leads uphill. It disappears into the trees without any sign or warning. Children are told never to walk that way. Hunters avoid the area entirely. Even animals seem uneasy near the hill. At night, villagers sometimes see a faint light in the distance. Not electric light, something weaker, flickering, like candles breathing behind broken windows. The building on the hill used to be a hospital, at least, that is what the old records say. It closed decades ago, after a series of incidents that were never fully explained. Patients disappeared. Staff quit without giving reasons. Documents went missing. Officially, the hospital was abandoned. Unofficially, people say it was left behind because it did not want to be alone. 20 years ago, several tourists arrived in the village. They planned to stay for only a few days. They wanted quiet, nature, and the abandoned hospital they had read about online. They had no idea what the village already knew. And the mountains were waiting. The tourists arrived in the village just before sunset. There were 4 of them. 2 couples, friends, who wanted to escape the city for a few quiet days. In the mountains, they parked near the only small shop and stepped out of the car. The air felt colder than expected. Hebia. The village was quiet, not peaceful. Empty. Curtains shifted behind the windows. Someone was watching, but no one came outside. Inside the shop, an old woman stood behind the counter. She looked at them for a long moment before speaking. "You won't stay long," she said. It wasn't a question. One of the men smiled and laughed softly. "Just a few days. We heard the nature here is beautiful." The woman hesitated. "And the hospital?" she asked. The smile faded. "People talk," he replied. "We're just curious." The woman leaned closer. "Curiosity brings people here," she whispered. "It doesn't always let them leave." That night, they stayed in a small rented house at the edge of the village. Sleep came slowly. The forest pressed close to the walls. Branches scraped against the windows. Sometime after midnight, one of them woke up. There were footsteps outside. Slow. Careful. Not an animal. He looked through the window. Nothing, but the footsteps continued, circling the house. Closer to dawn, they heard something else. Laughter, soft, childlike. "There are no children here," one of the women whispered. The laughter stopped instantly. In the morning, no one talked about the night. They packed their backpacks in silence. The road uphill waited. So did the hospital. And despite the fear they refused to name, they decided to go. The path leading uphill was narrower than they expected. Tall trees closed in on both sides, blocking the sky. The deeper they walked, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no insects. Even their footsteps sounded wrong, as if the ground did not recognize them. One of the men checked his phone again. No signal. They continued walking in silence until someone stopped. "Do you hear that?" At first, there was nothing. Then a sound, branches snapping, slow footsteps behind them. They turned around. The forest stood perfectly still. Moments later, the fog ahead began to thin. The hospital appeared suddenly, as if it had been there all along. A gray concrete building, broken windows, peeling walls. The front doors were slightly open. One of the women felt a sharp sense of dread. She wanted to turn back. Instead, she stepped inside. The air was cold and damp. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a long corridor. Somewhere deep inside the building, something moved. They moved deeper into the hospital. The corridor split into several directions, each one darker than the last. Their flashlights flickered. Some doors were locked. Others stood open, leading into empty rooms. In one of them, a wheelchair lay on its side. It looked recently moved. They heard footsteps again. This time, closer. Too close. One of the men ran toward the stairs. Another disappeared down a side corridor. Someone screamed. The sound echoed through the building, and then cut off abruptly. The hospital seemed to respond. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, something whispered, not words. Names. One by one. The walls felt closer now. Breathing felt difficult. The hospital was no longer just a place. It was aware, and it was not letting them leave. The screams stopped. Silence filled the hospital, thick and heavy. One of the tourists found himself alone in a narrow corridor. His flashlight barely worked now, the beam weak and unstable. He called out to the others. No answer. As he moved forward, the walls changed. Paint peeled away to reveal old markings beneath, symbols scratched into concrete. They weren't random. They formed patterns. The air grew colder with every step. Then he heard it. Breathing. Right behind him. He turned sharply. Nothing, but the breathing continued. Slow and patient, as if something was learning his rhythm. He ran. The corridor seemed longer than before. Doors that should have been there were gone. At the end of the hall, he saw a room filled with photographs. Hundreds of women, children, all staring forward, all with their faces destroyed. The breathing stopped. A whisper replaced it. You stayed. The flashlight went out. He woke up on the floor. For a moment, he thought it was over, that he had passed out, that he was safe. Then he realized the silence was wrong. To complete. No wind, no echoes. The corridor around him was different now. Cleaner, almost untouched. Lights flickered on above his head. Old hospital lights. Rooms along the corridor were no longer empty. Beds were neatly made. Curtains moved slightly, as if someone had just passed through. He heard voices. Not whispers. Conversations. Doctors discussing patients. Footsteps rushing past. The hospital was alive. A door at the end of the corridor slowly opened. Inside was a child's room. A small bed, a chair, a single drawing on the wall. It showed for people walking into a building. Only one figure was drawn walking back out. The door closed behind him. He stood frozen in the center of the room. The drawing on the wall began to change. The figures blurred, their shapes slowly erased, until only one remained. The one still inside the building. He felt a pressure in his chest. Breathing became difficult. A child's voice spoke softly behind him. "You stayed too long." He turned. A child stood in the doorway, pale, expressionless. Its eyes were empty, yet focused entirely on him. "Where are the others?" he asked. The child tilted its head. "They are here," it replied. "They help us remember." The walls around them darkened. The sounds of the hospital faded. All that remained was the child's voice. "You don't leave places like this," it said. "You become part of them." The lights went out. When the lights returned, he was no longer alone. The room was filled with figures, standing silently along the walls. They looked human, but their faces were empty and unfinished, as if something had erased what they once were. They did not move. They did not speak. They were watching. He recognized some of them. The man who ran toward the stairs, the woman who screamed. The others, seeing them, made his chest tighten. They were not ghosts. They were not alive either. They were something in between. The child stepped closer. "This is where you stay," it said. "This is where you are needed." He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The walls began to close in slowly. Not crushing, not cutting, enclosing him. The tourists were reported missing 3 days later. Search teams combed the forest for weeks. They found backpacks, torn maps, and footprints leading uphill. All of them ended near the hospital. Inside the building, there was nothing. No blood, no signs of a struggle, like arms. The last thing he felt was not pain. It was understanding. The case was closed, quietly. Officially, it was an accident in the mountains. Unofficially, no one wanted to talk about it. The village returned to silence. The hospital remained untouched, waiting. 20 years later, a young journalist found the case in an old archive. Too many missing details. Too much silence. He went to the village to find answers. An old man warned him, "You shouldn't go there," he said. "It remembers." The journalist entered the hospital alone. Days later, his camera, notebook, and recorder were found inside. He was never seen again. Some places don't want to be discovered. They want to be remembered. And some stories never truly end.